My name is Latasha Wilson, and today is October 22nd, 2010. I am visiting with Mary and Jack Fields on the Oklahoma State University campus in Stillwater, Oklahoma. This interview is one of a series of interviews with members of the OSU class of 1960 who are on campus for their 50-year reunion and is part of the O State Stories project of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. I want to thank you both for coming today and allowing us to interview you.
Thank you.
Were there some special reasons why you decided to participate in your class reunion?
To see old friends that we had not seen. Last year was special. I had worked at Willard Hall, checking the girls in and calling them up when their boyfriends arrived on the old machine where you had to pull the cord up and put it in and then buzz them. And they were having a reunion, so I got to see all the girls I used to flash the flashlight on. Because we had curfews in those days. I don't know if we had curfews now or not.
What are some things that you are most looking forward to seeing or doing while you're back on campus this year?
Again, visiting with friends that we knew back then. And last year I enjoyed visiting the Kappa Delta house because it was just in the process of being built my senior year. Oh. And so I did not live in the present house. But where the old house sat is now a parking lot across from Bennett Hall. Bennett, the prayer chapel.
Yes, chapel. Mm-hmm. And where are you living now?
We live in Corona, California.
Okay. Well, we're going to start out with having you each tell me a little bit about your early life, where you were born, and how you came to Oklahoma State University.
Well, I claim I'm 28, but I was born and reared in Gage, Oklahoma, and spent most of my first 18 years in that particular area. One of the interests that I had in OSU was, I think my sophomore through my senior year in high school, my parents and I would listen to the rebroadcast of the, at that time, Oklahoma A&M basketball. It was out of KVOO, and it would come on at 10:30, and so those were years that I really enjoyed listening to basketball, Bob Maddox and all of that, All-American, and of course I always admired Hank Iva and so forth. I think that's one of the reasons that I kind of had a desire to come at that particular time to Oklahoma A&M. Now, I did go a couple of years to Northwestern State at Alpha, where most of my friends were from high school. When I came over here, I was kind of by myself, and but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think maybe the first fall I was introduced to Mary, and then we started going steady, fairly quite a bit, my junior and senior year, and that's about all I know or would like to.
Okay. What about you?
My parents were season ticket holders for Oklahoma A&M football, and so we were introduced to Oklahoma A&M for quite early in our life, although I didn't attend a lot of the games with them. My father had played high school football with Jim Lookaball, who became one of the football coaches here at Stillwater, and Jim and his wife are very good friends, so they attended those games and kept on for until their early 70s, I suppose, attending football games, which would have been in the 1980s. So. Another introduction I had to OSU was through the 4-H clubs, because our junior, I'm trying to think, Roundup.
Yes.
Yeah, the Roundup was always held here, and so it was I always looked forward to staying in the dorms and being a part of the Roundup activities for 4-H.
And where were you from?
I'm from Jett, Oklahoma,
Okay.
and I grew up there and went to school in Jett until I came to Oklahoma A&M.
Do you remember which dorm you would stay in when you came for Roundup?
Willard, I think, was pretty much standard place that we stayed.
And what was your major?
My major was home economics and the family relations and child development. I also have a minor in elementary ed. So.
And what was your major?
My major was math education and a minor in business. I was my advisor felt like for quite a bit of that time I just had a math major, and he felt like that going out and looking, searching for a job, that you ought to have a minor. So I had taken quite a bit of accounting courses and economics and so forth. And so he said, how about taking typing? And I thought, well, that sounds ideal. I had my junior and senior year in high school beginning and I guess whatever you call advanced typing, but I had not typed all those many years other than just reports. I do remember working lots of times. My roommate would like to have written reports, and so consequently I did type for him. And he enrolled me, and we were going to try to get into beginning or intermediate typing, but since I'd had those 2 years in high school, I was forced to go into advanced typing. I walked into this room, all females, back typewriter back in the very back, and that's where I went. I absolutely know that I was the slowest one in the class, but we had a timing from 5 to 10 minutes on production, and our instructor, she said, now a lot of this is going to be, your grade is going to be based on accuracy and production. And I was really surprised. She said, I am giving at the end of the class, she said, there will be 2 that definitely will receive A's out of the class. And of course, I joked to myself, it was, Miss Throw Her Carriage at 135 would have to be number 1. But I really was surprised that I was number 2 in production, and she bragged on that to all of the ones that are in the class, that it was necessary to, speed was not always the important thing.
Accuracy was also important.
Yes, right. And I'm prouder of that particular grade, I think, than any grade I made, because I assumed that, as I said, I was really forcing, if I got up to 53 or 54 words a minute now, maybe on a 1 minute or so, I could maybe get into the 60s, but not the long drawn-out ones. And I sat next to the gal that could throw her carriage at 130 words a minute, and
Wow.
I might have 2 words here when she was already finishing a sentence. And at that first, that kind of was intimidating, but got used to it.
Are there any classes that you especially remember?
I was looking out at Old Central as we were in the room downstairs, and I remember my freshman English class in Old Central. And when I went home, my father asked me who my instructor was, and I don't remember her name now, and it was the same English instructor he had had. So it was kind of fun to come back to school and tell her, that she had had my father earlier. The home ec department was like a family, and Dean O'Toole and many of the I was just trying to think. I think my advisor was Mary Cox. I was trying to think of another lady that was so dear to me. I know there's a fellowship, scholarship thing in her name, and I'm just trying to think what it is, and I can't.
I've drawn a blank too.
But anyway, it was like a family, and all the girls and all the professors. It was really neat, so.
Did you ever live in the home management house?
No, I didn't. I visited my good friend Mary Joy Cunningham when she was there, but that was more for the home ec education majors.
Okay.
Family relations didn't stay there. But I did enjoy my years with the nursery school. We had, the students brought their children for childcare, and we did all of our observations and our experiments, and we had to learn nutrition for children, and so we had to be there to help them to observe how they ate and what they ate, and play with them, teach them games, teach them their basics. So as a student, that was very rewarding.
I also had a class. It was, I think, American literature or something, or in Old Central. And I do remember that if that particular professor held us over, there was like 10 minutes between classes. And my next class was, I took one particular semester a forestry class that was way out. And if this particular person, and he didn't do it on purpose, I know, but if we got out late, we were late getting to that particular class because of the distance.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, and lots of times you wouldn't run, but you didn't dally around.
You went sprinting out of the door.
Yes.
And I did really enjoy that particular class because it was the first time that I felt like I was really on my own. My best buddy was always very helpful in high school and then first couple years in college, and so he would help me with my English parts because he was an English major, and eventually he was the editor for Cliff Notes, so he was pretty outstanding on that type of thing. And I really felt pleased because, as I said, I was on my own on this and did fairly well, but
So besides Old Central, are there other buildings on campus you remember having houses or classes in?
I had it seemed like most of my math classes was on the fourth floor of the classroom.
Classroom was a brand new building for us,
Right.
and we thought it was very lovely. I'm trying to think, was there a Merrill Hall?
Moral.
Morrill Hall?
And it's still here.
Morrill Hall. I had classes there, mostly in the old home ec building. I don't even know if it's still here.
I'm not sure.
Because the new home ec building was built, just prior to my coming to school. And so that was a lovely building in that time. But the old building was still here. We had all of our nutrition classes in the old home ec building.
So where did you all live while you were on campus?
2.5 years was Cordell Hall. And the parking lot that I would park my vehicle was to the west. And I don't know, the last, like 10 years ago, all of that is built up, and I don't even know what's over there, but that's where we got to park. Now, there was a small parking lot to the east, but now that has been consumed by the stadium.
Oh, yes.
So, and I don't even know when they quit housing students at Cordell, but I even went to summer school one summer, and for some reason I there were only maybe 10 or 12 of us, but we were there on the south side in the lower one.
I lived at Willard Hall my freshman and part of my sophomore year because I was working there, and then I moved into the Kappa Delta house. Our senior year, the Kappa Delta house had sold, and so we were moved into, starts with an H?
Haggard?
I can't remember.
There's
Hall.
Thatcher.
There's Thatcher, but there was another one I thought that started with an H. We were moved into that building because it was not being occupied by anybody. Thatcher, maybe it was Thatcher. I was thinking there was another one. I can't think what it is.
I can't either.
Well,
It was one of the older dorms. Well, they tore down. Hanner. Maybe it was Hanner Hall. Is it still here?
I think so, yes.
It may have been Hanner Hall. I'm not sure. While they were building the new building, the new house.
Do you know what year the new house was completed then?
It must have been completed in 1961.
Okay.
Because I graduated in 1960, and that was the year they moved us out, the spring semester, because our house had sold to a fraternity, and they took occupancy maybe that whole year. I was doing my practice teaching that year, and so those things I just don't remember too much because I was in Ponca City doing my practice teaching.
Okay. Do you remember if you chose to live in the particular residence hall? Did you choose to live in Willard?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Mainly because second floor was filled with 4-H club friends and my home area. My roommate was from Jet. My first year, the second year I had a friend from Miami, Oklahoma, but a lot of 4-Hers chose Willard to stay at. And maybe it's because that's where we stayed at Roundup.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But
were you able to choose your room and your roommate?
Pretty much so, yes, in those days, yes.
What about you?
No. I didn't choose any roommate. It was whoever was there, and there were ones that I didn't know afterward. I didn't know before, and I haven't kept up afterwards. No, I did my practice teaching, which was a rarity, but I did my practice teaching at Stillwater High School.
Oh.
And it was in math, and it was also in business. Now, I think their high school, I think the business department sent a lot of their students down there to observe, like maybe an hour. But I was fortunate to be under the dean. I don't remember what his name was, but he was the dean of students there at the high school, and he wanted me to have one complete week. And so that was kind of kind of odd, you know, to be teaching and here having other students being observing you.
Yeah.
Another place, and I had forgotten, the Capadelta house was too crowded, that's why they were building a new house. For 6 weeks, or maybe longer, they asked some of us, to live in what was the international dorm at that time. And that was a wonderful experience because we had a great deal of students from Pakistan. And in those days it was hula hoop, and to just see these girls in their saris trying to do the hula hoop was tremendous. And they loved the fact that we celebrated birthdays and things like that. And we stayed in, is it North Stout? Is there or North Murray? I think is where all the international students were basically staying. We had a wonderful experience there.
Did the residence hall sponsor activities like dances or social events?
I don't remember the residence halls doing. I know each of the sororities and fraternities would have different events. I would say the student activities sponsored most of the dances for this campus. Like I know Western Week was the week we met, and there was a dance at the student union. I don't remember. I know we had some outstanding bands in the big band there. Harry James, was it? Harry James, and I wish I could remember them all. I remember I was thrilled when the Boston Pops Orchestra was coming, and I used to even know the orchestra leader at that time. He was so outstanding, but that was in Gallier Hall, and it was filled, for that.
It seems like that Willard had dances occasionally, because I do remember going over there.
Probably did.
And would, dance. I didn't know any of the girls that I know of.
Yeah, the basement kind of had a place where, basement had a snack bar and a big room where we could do that. I'd forgotten about that.
I like...
then they made it into a cafeteria.
In place of studying lots of times in the library, there were times that I would go to the lounges that would be like on the second or third floor of the student union. And one of the things that I do remember was that I had never personally seen a political, like a president, and Harry Truman had a reception in one of those rooms. It seems like one was like a Chinese lounge, or I don't remember exactly, and I do remember that it was completely packed, but I kind of wanted to get a view of him, and so I went and kind of peeked around just so that I could say, well, I at that particular time had seen somebody that had served as our president.
I was on the President's Council, and we were to be host and hostesses of international figures or some of the political leaders or such, or business associates. And the real treat was Haile Selassie of Ethiopia. He is still well loved in Ethiopia, although a coup threw his government over. But we had an agricultural college there during the time. And that was another reason that we had so many students from Pakistan, was Dean O'Toole visited Pakistan and was trying to establish, schools there for women. So the women were brought here to be trained to go back and to teach their women the skills, the home economic skills. And
Did you maintain a relationship with any of the women from Pakistan?
I didn't. No, I didn't at all. I do remember I was also hostess for Bill Kerr, who was the son of Mrs. Kerr, or the Kerr Glass Company. And I think I was put with him because my aunt worked for Kerr Glass. And, I remember those names, but, there were others that I just don't remember. But that was a wonderful program, and we enjoyed that very, very much.
So what kind of interaction would you have with these figures that came in?
A lot of times, you would take them around the campus or wherever they wanted to go, and if there was a dinner, you took them to the banquet or the dinner and sat with them, and
So do you remember any of your conversation or any special moments from those meetings?
Not really. I really wasn't the hostess for Haile Selassie, but I was at the reception. The students were there at the reception. But I just remember, I don't know what you'd say, flamboyant kind of dress, and he had a wonderful personality. His English was fluent. So he was a very impressive person.
Do you remember anything specific about Harry Truman?
No, not really. Of course, he's, during the time that I was in, 7th, 8th in high school, he served until 52. So I do remember that in high school, one student would be for somebody else, and we all would always have discussions, and I did always I had followed Harry Truman, especially he wasn't predicted to win, in the 48 election, and he got out and barnstormed and did win over Dewey. And then the last couple years in high school, and then of course during the time that I was in college, it was the time of Eisenhower. And as I looked at your brochure, it said when the 1960 people came back, Lyndon Johnson was president. Well, that was not correct. At that particular time, it was still Eisenhower. Because my first election, and I'd always wanted to, I was always ready, to vote. And my first, when I was eligible to vote, was going to be 1960. And it was between Nixon and Kennedy. And I, at that particular time, kind of had a hang up on religion, that was one of the things on Kennedy. And whenever I was eligible to vote, I didn't vote. I have voted in every election after that, but the one that I had always anticipated that I would vote for, I didn't, because I wasn't really positive exactly who I felt like was qualified. Now, there was a lot of debates. That was kind of the beginning of our debate series and of course the debate was between Kennedy and Nixon. And then, of course, the tragedy, Mary and I were married in 61, and we had gone on a teacher visitation at Woodward High School. Well, in Woodward, they always ask, all the times that we were there, we went out to visit one a school. And so Mary and I were both in Amarillo, Texas, the day of the assassination. And it was a sad particular time.
It was very interesting, you know, how the schools handled it, you know, because it was occurring right during the school, you know, school day. And
I haven't kept up with him, but there in Woodward High School where I taught all of the algebra, and the other gentleman that was in the math department taught all the geometry. And I had never observed him, and he was, he had, I believe that spring, had resigned and went to Amarillo. And so I had the school make arrangements for my visitation to go visit him. And I was sitting in the back of the room when the announcement came around 12:30. We had been to lunch. I thought that he conducted and explained to the students and so forth and so on. Of course, there was a lot to come out. We actually didn't know whether, you know, all the announcement was that there had been,
he'd been
shot. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. But Gerald handled that situation. And I often wondered if I would have had the dignity if the situation had been reversed. So I thought his maturity was way better than probably my maturity, because I had only been out of school like 3 or 4 years. And yeah, those are things that you kind of remember. And
I just happened to think the fellow who came to teach geometry at Woodward after that, their daughter
was the drum major of OSU's band.
Oh.
later years.
okay.
And I don't remember, that would have been in the 60s.
Right.
Then
They were
90s.
originally from Fairview.
Right, right. And
Logston was his name.
Right, and she was, the thing that was impressive about the Oklahoma State Band at that time, the drum majors would strut out to the middle, bent over backwards. Their tassel would almost be touching, you know, the ground behind them. It was impressive, you know, and I don't know when that stopped, but because they use cowboy hats now, don't they?
I think so.
In those days, they had the white helmets, you know, with the plumes on them, and she was probably one of the last ones to be able to march down the field in such a bent over position. It was fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah, they were well known for that.
So do you want to tell me about when you met?
My roommate at that time was Kay Douglas from Miami, Oklahoma, and she kept saying she wanted me to meet Jack. And it seemed like she would try to set up dates for us, and I was either busy or he was busy. We just never could really get together on a date. So I think it was in April, finally, of '58 that we really didn't have a date, but we ran into each other at the Western Dance. And
Well, I think she hit me on the shoulder, and
I did.
I still have the bruise probably from. You want to see the black?
But he did. He walked by and I hit him.
Of course, I was, very bashful and all those things.
So anyway, that evening we went to the Western dance, I guess.
I don't remember.
Anyway, we had a date that night, so.
And you started dating from that point on?
Right.
What would you do on some of your dates?
Go to the movies.
Right. I often, not that I'm a cheapskate, but I wonder how a young man and a young woman during this particular time can go to a theater and pay $12 for a ticket or whatever the price, because it seemed like that, boy, if we went to a movie and it was going to be $1 for each one, I thought was pretty high. Normally,
Is the movie theater still here in the corner across from the fire station?
No, the Hideaway took over the movie theater.
Well, that used to have the movies, the international movies. They'd be in a foreign language and you'd have to read the English below it while you were watching the film, So that was always kind of fun. But, most of the time there was a really large movie theater downtown.
A lot of our dates, and I don't know that there was, but a lot of our dates we would just meet at the library and then go for a Coke or something like that.
Where would you go for a Coke?
To the student union. My hangout was, I thought the fourth floor was the most ideal place.
There was always music playing up there, and you could dance. And during the nice weather, there was a place out, out on an outdoor area to dance. So I suppose they played the jukebox. I don't know, But anyway, you'd go to the snack bar, and there was always students hanging around, visiting, and if you wanted to dance, you could dance.
No, I do think you mentioned something about, did the dorm sponsor something? It does seem like that Cordell, at one time, maybe every year, they would be advertising that you could bring a date, and you could go through. It wasn't. I suppose that was called the cafeteria down there. I don't know what. Anyway, our kitchen. And I do remember that I did, Mary came over, or I went and got her or something. I don't remember that exactly, but I do remember that she had the privilege of eating in our cafeteria. And that was something that at Alva, it seemed like the food was like home cooked. When I got here, and of course I'd had 2 years, and in that particular year, my roommate was a freshman, and so he and I would normally, go down. We'd try to be back to the dorm, so we would go for our noon and evening meal. But there were some times that I thought, what in the world are we having? I'd have to check the calendar to find out what I had eaten or was going to.
I know Murray and Stout and all of them had cafeteria type eating, and I think it was my sophomore year they changed Willard's from being a cafeteria from being just a dining room to a cafeteria, and so we had both men and women coming. It was, if you bought the meal ticket, you could either use it at the student union or you could come to the Willard cafeteria. So that changed from what the other dorms had. And
No, I can't.
There was chocolate cake that, I don't know, at the student union. I always loved their chocolate cake.
No, everything seemed to be more steamed, not that the food, not that the people that were preparing it were poor cooks. It was just different. And than what I had been used to. And so you could always, on weekend, go home and complain about what kind of food you had had during the week. You know?
Would you ever go out to eat at restaurants around town?
There was a couple times, but this was, it seemed like either my parents had come over or I don't know. It seemed like Mary invited me once or twice to, when her folks came over, but no.
The place to go was the Sonic Drive-In, you know, and it's amazing to me, you know, that has stayed. I mean, that's one of the drive-ins that's still available in the area.
Do you remember the Hideaway opening?
I don't.
No, there was a place that some guys had opened up, and I think it was before Eskimo Joe's, but two fellows had opened up a pizza place, you know, right down where the Wesley Foundation goes. I think down that street where some stores, you know. There was also a store there that for picnics and things, they had a machine and they would roast a chicken for you, you know, and you could pick up a roasted chicken and some potato salad and things, and it was neat to just, you know, have kind of a picnic.
I don't know what the enrollment size of how many students are on campus here in the last few years, but you want to remember when we were here, it was the total enrollment, if I remember correctly, was like 7,000, and that was, you know, for the ones that were working on advanced degrees and so forth. So I would think that there was like 2,000 or 2,500. So it was nothing, the size was nothing like it is now.
You mentioned that you had a car. Would you ever drive around Stillwater for any reason, or did you just go home?
Yes, I would drive.
What was the silly saying they used to say? Go to the your date would ask you, let's go watch the submarine races and drive out to Boomer Lake or something. I don't remember what that.
Did you fall for it?
Of course. So we did do that.
And I believe the name changed from Oklahoma A&M to Oklahoma State in 1956. Was that while you were here, or had it changed already?
Well, it was A&M whenever I came here.
Okay.
So
it was my freshman year.
You know, I would question, did you say 58?
I was thinking 56.
Well, I think it was 58.
Okay.
The only reason that I'm saying that is a lot of my stuff is still, whenever I go through a lot of it, it's like notebooks.
All of my freshmen says Oklahoma A&M, so that would have been 56, 57. So it would have probably been the following year.
Well, how did you feel about the name change?
I like Oklahoma A&M. In fact, I still lots of times refer to this as Oklahoma A&M. No, I'm going on with, it seemed to be the advertisement at that particular time that there would be more prestige if it was going to be called Oklahoma State. And this was not the only agriculture college that changed their name during that particular time. There was Utah and New Mexico and a lot of those that were A&M that went to state about the same time.
It offered the opportunity for them to change the way they looked at things. It broadened the ability for what they were able to offer here at Oklahoma State, because it then became the College of Home Economics, the College of Engineering, instead of it being Oklahoma A&M College or Oklahoma A&M University, it broadened the offerings.
Right, I don't think the word university was now I could be wrong about that, but I don't think the university was given to Oklahoma A&M. I think the university status was when it became Oklahoma State University. And no, I laugh and joke. At that time, I went to A&M, but they had to change the name to get rid of me. So,
What do you remember about Pistol Pete? Do you remember Frankie?
Remember the original.
Okay.
He always, was either on a horse or most of the time on a stagecoach for homecoming parade. He was usually always here.
Did you ever meet him personally or have any encounters?
I don't believe so. Other than that, I don't recall.
I don't.
What are some of your homecoming memories?
We went to we come now to homecoming. Everybody's in either jeans or slacks or and orange, which is kind of traditional of all the colleges now, except in the South where they still dress up. The women are very dressed up. That was a day to wear some of your finest clothes, and to have a big corsage. And in those days, it seemed like we had sweater sets. You had a small sweater, you had a cardigan sweater over it, and a skirt, of some kind in the fall colors, pleated skirt, whatever. And you wore heels. It was a day for dressing up.
Did your residence halls or your sorority do anything like they do now with house decks or participate in the parade or anything?
The parade was much bigger in those days. There were more floats by the sororities and the dorms. The dormitories seemed to always have the decorations on their lawns, there was the old Ford. Was that the old Ford place down here? Is where there'd be a truck and they'd be covered with chicken wire in the shape of whatever you were, and you were constantly.
But it seemed
spent
like
the whole night
Yes.
putting.
it seemed like that, and of course, a couple of times I remember going down there and working, but it didn't seem like that. It must have been a class float that we were working on, because I didn't belong to any fraternity, so consequently I wouldn't have been, and
We
the
had a lot of floats in those days. Yeah.
And so it just seems like that, a bunch of us would say, well, we've got to go down and.
Well, Cordell Hall may have had a float.
Well, they may have had. I'm not positive about that.
But I know one year we did the house decorations, but never anything as elaborate as what is now. I mean, with all their electronics and everything.
All right.
And it was very small,
No,
I don't know, does the university have pictures and things of,
I think
in your
so.
archives?
Yes.
Of those?
No, last year, whenever you begin to hear that OSU has the biggest homecoming, and all of that stuff, you kind of, for years on years, you kind of questioned that. But when we came last year, and I thought, my land, this is a mob, out there by Theta Pond and all, whatever that street is, I can't remember.
University.
Okay,
Yeah.
University. That doesn't seem to be what it was called. Maybe it was called college.
I think it was called college.
It was. That's a change.
The biggest crowd that I remember was and I think this was 56. we beat Kansas in basketball, and that was when Will Chamberlain was playing. And the largest crowd I remember was over there at that intersection of where the south of Willard and Stout and now, but that crowd was nothing to compare with what was around last year for homecoming. But that, to me, back in '56 or whenever it was, well, that was a large crowd. I remember, riding home to my folks.
Did anybody ever tell you about Panty Raid?
Yes. Were you involved?
I was at Willard hanging onto the door to keep him out, and the quarterback was right across. I was looking him right in the eye. And we kept him out. We kept them out. But that was kind of an exciting time. And flooding. We had so much rain.
Really?
That I worked many hours one night moving water out of the basement of Willard Hall because it had flooded.
Well, now I remember my advisor, and I think his name was Frazier, but he had a home that was, I'm going to say, a half a mile north of our present campus. It may have been further. There's kind of a valley type, and that area flooded, and I remember going up there and helping to move furniture or whatever. But that may have been during a summer school.
You mentioned you worked in Willard.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do?
I was, and I've been trying to remember. I wasn't called a proctor, I don't think, but I would check the girls in at night to be sure that everybody was in their room by 11. They couldn't be roaming in the dorms. 11 was to be in your room. And then there was a little tiny office there with the switchboard. It was the old-fashioned switchboard, which you would pull up and stick it into the room, into the hole for that room.
And now, what did it do? It buzzed the room?
Or buzz the room. That's, and we did different things in the dorm, whatever we
I
were
think they were
assigned to
called
do.
proctors, but
Yeah, we may have been. I was thinking there was another word for it. But anyway, sometimes we worked the snack bar down in the basement.
Do you remember how much you earned?
40 cents an hour. Yes, but 40 cents an hour in those days, it went well, Our tuition wasn't that much. I have no idea what tuition is now. I can't remember what we paid for our son in the 80s. But I think, did we pay about $5.25 credit hour? Or 5?
I don't remember what it was. It seems like that it would be around $80 for whatever you were taking for a semester. And that was pretty rough to come by, I remember.
Especially in that year. I know when my father passed away, the lawyer said, the years you went to college were a struggle for your folks. He said, I don't know whether you knew it or not. But I was fortunate. I had a wonderful summer job. I worked for the Department of Agriculture in Alfalfa County. And so I was very fortunate to be able to afford to come.
What do you remember about the teams and athletic events of that era?
Well, Mo Iba, Eddie Sutton. What was Dick? Was it Dick something? It was the big hall center.
Begin with an S.
Sorgel?
Sorgel. Dick Sorgel. And
our football team one year went to a bowl, and they hadn't gone to a bowl, and I think it was called the Bluegrass Bowl. and I'm going to say that it was in Lexington, Kentucky, but I may be wrong about that. So I thought we had a fair football team. Now, I don't think our basketball team was as competitive as it had been the years that I became acquainted with Oklahoma A&M.
I remember the year we beat Kansas when Will Chamberlain was playing. That was such a treat. You know, I enjoyed the wrestling. I thoroughly enjoyed our wrestling.
But now the basketball boys, I'm not positive about the names, but I remember seeing them on campus, and I had economics with a couple of them, and they were always very, very pleasant boys. They spoke, and smiled like we were friends, like I know you, and it would be only by appearance.
We had to take dancing. That was one of our PE things. And the football coach had decided his boys needed to have a little more grace to their movements or something. And so my dance class was filled with football boys. And for a 300-pound tackle, to polka was very interesting. So anyway, I can remember we had a lot of fun during polka class when we were learning how to polka. I don't know that anybody ever polkas anymore, but it was to help them move better on the football field.
But all the games with like OU, that would be around Thanksgiving time, and of course, we would try to get back or to see the games, and they were always the runaway, like 50-0 or in favor of OU,
Did you attend all the games, all the football or basketball?
Now the most exciting game that I really remember, and I don't know what year it was, but it was a homecoming game, and I know that my folks came down for it. It was with Air Force. Air Force had only been participating in their division, like 5 or 6 years, so they were quite young, and this was an exciting game. I'm not even going to venture to say what the score was, but I assume that OSU got beat. But they had led most of the game, and it was like the final score would have been like 12-10 or some score like that. Yeah. But we talked about that particular game, whenever I went back home, because it was exciting for my folks, and it was certainly exciting for me. Because
we had one of the most outstanding wrestling teams at that time.
Right.
It seemed like we were in the NCAA finals most of the time. I know Tommy Chesbro was one of the wrestlers and later became a coach here. And he married one of my sorority sisters, so that's how I kind of, kept up with him. And I was trying to think who his coach was very famous. I can see his face, but I can't think what it is. But it was a wonderful experience for me, because in high school we never experienced wrestling, as such. And so and we had a speaker in California, probably 2 or 3 years ago, that had been on the wrestling team here at OSU. It was very interesting when he found out that's where we graduated from.
it does seem like that about the time that we changed our name from A&M to State was about the time that we were invited into the Big 8 at that time. Mm-hmm. Most of the conference was known as Missouri Valley, And I know in basketball, we played Cincinnati, and that was during the time of Oscar Roberts, who was very outstanding. And the Missouri Valley schools were not the ones that I kind of remembered, like Wichita and Tulsa and St. Louis Billikens and so forth. They were on up in the Ohio area, it seemed like, But I think that they...
Myron Roderick?
Myron Roderick, yes.
Yes, fine.
Right.
Right.
Well, what is it about Oklahoma State that you think sparks such loyalty in students and alumni?
I don't know, it's like a family when you go here. I think, it's just a family atmosphere that you have here. And I guess the traditions of things that we did, and the sports teams are fun to follow, but that wasn't the total picture of school, so we just had a high quality professors, and they were interested in their students, and they just made you feel welcome, and that your education was very important.
Right. I agree there. I don't know. I suppose at a smaller place you would have gotten to be acquainted more with the professors, but I had Dr. Robinson in the math department that I thought was outstanding. And I don't know, the classes were not, now like in the math classes, they were not large. Now,
History classes were a different
yes.
thing.
Now those
Right, big auditorium.
some of the required courses that you had to take, I feel like that I was maybe lost at times. Like in the history class, it seemed like my history teacher wasn't the one that was making up the test. It was somebody else, and he'd every once in a while say, well, I think this might be what you would experience, and I think, well, you're the guy that will be making up the test, but I don't think it was.
I'll never forget, I had history, and it was time for the final, and I could not find my notes or my history book, because we cleaned the Kappa Delta house that weekend, and somebody had put it on a shelf in the library, and I didn't find it. I was concerned, so I went to my history professor and I said, I've lost my notes in my history book. If I could just borrow a history book, I think I'll be all right for the final. Well, I was working the 4-H roundup, which was the week after finals, and ran into him, and he said, well, I guess you did all right. He said, the grades aren't posted yet, but you got an A-. So I was thrilled. And I thought, as big as that history class, for him to remember, remember me, and to, even with all the huge number of students that were in there, he had a personal interest in all of us. And that was good. And then I suppose one of my favorite classes was biology, and got into genetics, and I enjoyed that very much. And had the professor was from my home county, which was kind of interesting. So.
Well, we probably need to wrap it up soon so you can get to your interview, but do you want to say a few words real quick about what you did after you left OSU?
I taught mathematics at Woodward High School. I finished here in January of 1959. and went for an interview. The science students had been going over to Woodward, and they kept saying, well, you know, they have their eye on somebody that they want, and I didn't apply until, you know, Christmas time. But when I got there, I felt like that I had the job. And so I taught 7.5 years at Woodward High School. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think I sponsored my first couple years. I was single there. I think I sponsored every sock hop after every football game and every basketball game. And I felt like I was closer to the students than I'd ever been in my life. During that particular time, while I was in college, I worked as a seasonal park ranger a couple summers in Badlands in South Dakota. And then I worked 3 summers as a seasonal park ranger in Rocky Mountain National Park. And this is where Mary and I spent our honeymoon. The first year at Rocky, most of the seasonals reported at July the 1st, and so we set our wedding date for the 25th of June, and lo and behold, I was the ranger that they were wanting to come to the Western Slope on June the 1st. So, like sometime in April, I really didn't know who to contact, but I contacted one of the permanents not that I really didn't work under, but I knew. And he said, Jack, don't worry about it. He said, you still come June the 1st, and we'll give you, we'll end a couple lieu days at the end of, in there, and a couple beginning lieu days, and you'll have about 4 days off. So that's the way I came back, and we did go ahead and were married on June the 25th, and we spent then that summer and the next summer working with the National Park Service. Maybe even the next summer, I don't remember.
I started my teaching career in California. Liz Long from Garber, and I graduated in 1960, and we started that fall in what is the county of Los Angeles, but it was the Roland School District, which was only an elementary school district. It was out in the countryside, out with the dairies and out with the groves, and we had a beautiful drive to work because the closest place we could live was Covina to the school, and so we taught 1 year there. She met her husband that year and stayed in California, and Jack and I became engaged that December, and so I came back in June, and we taught in Woodward, as he said. I taught 3rd grade, and he taught in the high school. We were having a hard time making ends meet with the salaries we were getting in Oklahoma, and we just happened to see a newspaper article about they were interviewing for Corona Unified School District. And so we went to Oklahoma City for the interview. We were hired, and we moved out there in 1966. And Jack taught, 27 years in the high school, and I taught 26 years in the elementary school. And that's where we raised our 2 sons, and our older son could hardly wait to get back to Oklahoma. 2 weeks after he graduated, he had moved back with my parents, his grandparents, so he could set up his residency to come to an Oklahoma school. And he has his BS from Oklahoma State and his master's degree. It was in accounting, and his master's in business administration.
What is his name?
Douglas.
Okay.
Douglas Fields. And his wife also graduated here, and that's where they met. He was her flag football coach. So that's how they met. Anyway, so it's been good, a good experience. My parents started school here, and my dad in 26, and my mother in 26 and 27. In those days, you didn't graduate to become a teacher. You had 2 years, and you received your teachers. So my mother had 2 years here, and my father only had his freshman year here. But this was the only place that we were to come, you know, and he did instill that in his grandson too, I think, eventually. Although I'm afraid OU all during high school was his dream, but when it came down to it, he chose to go to OSU. So,
Well, that's great.
No, if it hadn't have been for Mary, I probably would have never gone to California. And I laugh and joke with ones that I know in California that I'm just like Will Rogers. And of course, the whole joke is you're supposed to say, "How is that?" And the question is, well, you know, Will said that whenever he left Oklahoma and went to California, he raised the IQ of both states. And I like to pull that joke. And I pulled it on a couple the second time. So.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend here for the OSU homecoming.